You're watching CTN, the Connecticut Network, connecting you to state government since 1999.
Welcome to In the Room, Connecticut Mirror's monthly series of conversations with our state elected officials. I'm John Dankosky. Today we're very happy to be sitting down with Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. We're going to be talking about her background and her career, about her role the office plays in making sure that we're able to exercise one of our most important rights, which is the right to vote. There have been some big changes over the last couple of years about how that right works in Connecticut. We'll dig into these changes because I don't think everyone exactly knows how it works these days, as I'm sure we'll get into. I'd like to give special thanks, though, first to our sponsors for this series. They've been with us throughout. I'd like to thank the Mohegan Tribe, the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law. Thank you all so much for your support. Also a huge thanks to the folks at the Ferguson Library here in Stamford for partnering with us and helping to bring this event together. We're seated today in the Dudley Williams Auditorium. It's named after the former vice chairman of the Connecticut Mirror's Board of Directors. Dudley sadly passed away back in 2021, but he left a huge legacy of growth at the Connecticut Mirror. He served the Stamford community for many years and impacted many lives. So it's a bit of a full circle moment for us to be here for this event. I should also mention one other thing before we start. The passing of another incredibly important member of the Connecticut Mirror family today. Tom Condon, one of the most important journalists in Connecticut history. I can't get into everything that you should know about Tom's life and career. For that, you can go to ctmirror.org. There's actually a really beautiful obit that my colleague Steve Busmeyer wrote about Tom. For many of us in this business, he was kind of the North Star of what a reporter, what a columnist, what a journalist, and really what a person should be. He was funny, he was kind, he was very caring. He gave a lot of time to younger journalists, including me. In the later years of his career at the Hartford Courant and the Mirror, he specialized in telling stories about issues that people here in Stamford care deeply about. We were just talking about. He covered public transit, suburban sprawl, land use, and really what it means to be...
Recording in progress.
Oh, and what it means to be in a commuter state. So I just want to say I learned a lot from Tom Condon. It's a far better place, the state, because he told stories about it. And all of us who work with him are far better for having been in his orbit for some time. So thank you, Tom. Okay, before we start with our Q&A, you have a card that you got when you walked in. By scanning these QR codes on the card, you can sign up for our newsletter. You can make a gift, of course, because the Connecticut Mirror is nonprofit journalism, and we rely on you to help support it. So please consider a gift. If you'd like to go online, if you're watching online right now, it's ctmirror.org. Just click on the donate button. Okay, that's all the stuff I have to say beforehand. Secretary Thomas, welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
So, in just a bit, I'd like to talk about your career and what brought you to this job. But let's talk about voting in the state. Up until recently, Connecticut sort of stood by and watched as every other state in the nation expanded early voting or mail voting. This allowed
Recording
millions...
in progress.
Yes, recording still in progress. Let's see if we can stop making that noise happen during our conversation. This allowed millions of people to cast their ballots easily across the entire country. But we didn't do it here. We dragged our heels. Now it's 24 years into the 21st century, and we're here. Talk to me about what early voting in Connecticut is and isn't for this election.
Thank you. It's a good question. People often ask why it took us so long when I used to be a legislator, but I'm no longer. But when the legislature passed the early voting law, we became the 47th state in the country to have early voting. And a lot of people thought, like, why is this? It's because a lot of our election law is built into our state constitution, unlike almost any other state in the country. So they can just pass a law change we had to change our constitution, which took longer. So early voting for the upcoming election will include 14 days, 2 weeks, 2 Saturdays, I say, 2 Sundays, and 2 late nights. A lot of people out there don't quite know what early voting is. They often say like, oh, so I can mail in my vote? No, that would be absentee voting. Early voting is in person 2 weeks before Election Day. So it starts on Monday, October 21st, and runs through Sunday, November 3rd. And it's a great way to assist voters of all types.
Okay, so like where do people go? Do they just go to the same place they've been voting for all these years?
Sounds like a simple question,
It
but
seems
it's a
like a
little
simple
more
question.
complex.
Of course it
Welcome
is.
to election law.
Welcome to election law in Connecticut. But anyway, please continue.
So no, you do not go to your normal polling place. So every town in Connecticut must have one location. In most towns, it's town hall or city hall, but it can depend on your municipality. So check your town's website, check our website, and it can change from election to election. So you'll just want to stay up to date before you vote every year to find out where that location is.
Okay, so if people are listening to this online or here, they could go to your website and they'd have that updated information, or is the town sometimes changing that and not telling you, and then you wouldn't have updated information on your website?
Well, good news. The town has to tell us because that is written into the law, and we have to approve that location, and that happens before every single election. The downside is that by the time that process occurs, we are just a couple of weeks out from the beginning of early voting. So it's not the kind of thing where you can look it up 3 months in advance. People just have to get used to a new normal. For early voting, check the location a couple of weeks before the election. And I think, this is the first year. Once we've had early voting for a couple of years, I think towns will figure out what locations work best for which elections, and it'll be more routine.
Okay, so it's a couple weeks in advance of Election Day right now. What should it be?
Well, what should which be?
What should the date be? How early should early voting be?
Oh.
I mean, if you were drawing things up, you were a legislator, but if you were drawing things up and you said, okay, this is how it really should work, should it be 3 weeks? Should it be 4 weeks? Should it be a shorter period of time? What should early voting really look like from your perspective?
I'm a fan of a shorter period of time, mainly based on the cost. Connecticut is somewhat unique in that our elections are administered at the municipal level, whereas most states it's administered at a county level. So there might be a county, for example, that has 2 million voters, but they might only have 20 locations for early voting because they assume people can make it a certain distance. But because we are town by town, it means every single town has to have a location. So, and we also have very restricted absentee ballot laws compared to the rest of the country.
I'm gonna get into that.
So all of that is to say, if I were creating a holistic system, I would have universal access to absentee ballots and a shorter early voting period.
Okay, so you think a shorter early voting period, but that specifically has to do with the cost. Let's say the cost wasn't a problem. Let's say, and going back to something that my dear departed friend Tom Condon wrote about a lot, is regionalism in the state. If somehow or other we didn't have to conduct 169 or however many independent voting places that we have right now, if we didn't have to do it that way, couldn't we make the time period a little longer? Couldn't we actually act like other states that are, I don't know, more grown up when it comes to voting?
I'm not a fan of that, only because what the data has shown is that states who have had early voting for, this has been around for decades.
Yeah.
So states who have had it for a long time have found that there is great usage at the very beginning of the period and at the end of the period. And during the intermediary period,
sort of like writing a term paper,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to me, something like 7 to 10 days feels like you keep the volume high and you still provide the convenience. I like the fact that we have 2 full weekends. I think that makes a big difference.
I think that makes a huge difference. So, okay, so then how does this affect the absentee ballot piece of this? So we've always had absentee ballots in Connecticut, but they were no excuse. It's a double negative. They essentially made you make an excuse for why you weren't going to be around to vote that day. So that's changed. Or hasn't it?
No, it hasn't changed.
But I mean,
it's changed a little over the last couple of years. For example, the law was aligned with our state constitution to name sickness as one of the excuses. Meaning it didn't necessarily have to be your sickness. And people get confused about this all the time. So I give a real life example. I was speaking with a woman and she said, I didn't apply for an absentee ballot, but my husband's having surgery the day before the election. I'm not sure if I'll be able to leave him alone because he was same day surgery. I'm not sure if I'll be able to leave him alone to go vote. So until a few years ago, she could not have voted by absentee ballot, but now she can. But we still require one of 6 reasons to vote by absentee, and most states don't have that requirement.
Why do we still have that requirement?
Because like early voting, it's embedded in our state constitution. And a lot of people say, like, why should we amend the Constitution? It's sacrosanct. That sounds like something really bad to do. But because of this little issue of a lot of our election law, we've amended the state constitution around absentee ballot voting. I think it's 5 or 6 times. The first time to allow Civil War soldiers to vote. Most recently, I believe it was either the provision about poll workers who are working in a town other than their own, allowing them to vote by absentee ballot. So it's not so unusual because of the age of our state constitution.
Okay, so a few things. We all saw what happened. I think the door was opened during COVID to our ability to vote a whole bunch of different ways that we'd never voted before. And I think we saw the state didn't sink into the ocean. We were actually able to continue functioning, and it all worked. Let's talk about the mail-in portion of this. What would you draw up to make mail-in voting, whether by calling it absentee ballot or something else, more available to people? What would that look like if you could draw things up by yourself?
Yeah, right now, what I don't love about Connecticut is that basically all of the information that is provided to the public, a lot of the communication to the public is done almost exclusively by political parties and political candidates. And that can be fine, but I would rather see an entity, like a nonpartisan entity like our office, insert themselves into that process instead. And that is in fact what happens in a lot of states, like the County Board of Elections handles all the mailings, etc. So I would like to see a system like that where political parties are getting out of absentee ballots and the Secretary of the State's office is getting into it.
That actually sounds like it would make some sense.
It just costs money, and therein lies the problem.
And therein lies the problem. We have a bunch of questions here that came in advance from various Connecticut Mirror members, and that's one of the reasons I was saying before, if you'd like to become a member of the Connecticut Mirror, you can support it, you can ask questions for events like this. I have a bunch of questions to get to. One of our viewers said, having spent time on the doors for candidates and primaries, most voters did not know about early voting. Connecticut needs more time to educate voters about this vital option to our democracy. So, a couple things about that. Do you agree with this statement? Do people not really know about this?
No one knows about early voting.
That's why we're talking about it.
And I will say, so I do a lot of anecdotal on-the-ground research, meaning I travel all around the state, big towns, small towns, community groups, other groups, and most people don't know about early voting, and the ones who do have no idea what it means. So I say, have you heard we have early voting? Oh, yes, yes, yes. And then I ask a follow-up question like, oh, so, are you going to the polls? And that's when are you planning to use it this year? And they were like, yeah, I'm going to mail in my ballot. And I'm like, no. Or they say, yeah, but what does that mean? Like, they don't know. Like, this is groundbreaking. It's the first time in Connecticut we can vote on a weekend. That is huge, but no one knows.
So there's so much to unpack in there. I guess the first question really is, that's a problem, especially heading into a big election like this. How do we solve it? What do we need to do to get people to know this stuff, aside from events like this?
Well, the easiest way would have been to have received a budget to educate voters that this is happening, that it exists. Short of that, we did not receive a budget, so we've been doing a lot of outreach, and it's a small word for an awful lot of legwork that we've been doing over the last year and a half. It is smart partnerships like we just reach out to a ton of entities like Department of Transportation is like, hey, send us a flyer, we'll hang it up in bus stations. It's starting creative programs like our Civically Engaged Organization program, where we ask businesses and organizations to take the pledge to help spread civic education. Some of our partners like Connoisseur Media decided to give us free PSAs in advance of the last election. It's working with grassroots organizations. We have probably about 500 relationships that I would deem active that have access to some population group. And we reach out to them regularly, and they are helping us spread the word. I just did a telephone town hall with AARP a couple of days ago. On Saturday, UConn football had their first home game, and they invited me to come talk about early voting during halftime on the field. So all of these types of partnerships make a difference, and it helps us push the information out to the general public.
That seems like a lot of work for you and your office to put together 500 different partnerships to try to get the word out.
Especially when there's only one person doing it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So what was the budget that you needed to get this done? Like, how much money did you need?
We've requested the first year we requested $2 million, and then we lowered it to 1.5. So that would have been television, radio, streaming services, digital, gas stations, etc.
So $1.5 million to essentially let a state of more than 3 million people know that something monumental had happened to change one of their most fundamental rights, and we weren't able to get that across the finish line to get you to do that. So you've got to like bootstrap it and go to UConn football games, and hopefully people will listen to you.
Luckily, I'm high energy.
Yeah. Oh, it seems that way, but I mean, I'm being snarky about it, but I think with good reason. Do you think that hopefully we'll be able to get some sort of allocation so that we can have the necessary education in the future? Because if people don't know, then we won't actually have early voting in Connecticut. We'll have partial early voting in Connecticut, and that seems to be kind of a tragedy after all these many decades of trying.
John, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But actually, I think, I'm trying to be funny, but I think one of the fundamental issues is who is the we in this equation. I don't think most people have spent much time thinking about how our elections are funded or how our civic lives are organized, are funded. There's no law that says that secretaries of the state have to explain how voting works to voters. And this is not a problem unique to Connecticut. Funding in elections has always been slim, and funding and civic engagement is fairly non-existent. So when you say we, I think of we the people, and are we communicating this to our legislators, be they federal, state, or local? And I think the answer is no. But I do think it is time for us all to think about where we want our taxpayer dollars to go. I think most people, if you ask them, would say, I would love to get a mailing. When I was out door knocking, the number one question I got, is there one place I can go to find everything about the election? And the answer was no, until October 1st of this year, because we're very creative. We have some great interns. We're putting together a voter guide for the first time, and we're going to put it up on our website.
I know, but
it's no way to run a democracy, I know.
I mean, that's fantastic. I'm glad you're going to do it. But what you don't want to hear from the Secretary of the State is, we've got some great young people who are interns who can figure this out for us. It'll be great. In order to run an election.
Oh no, it's a horrible way to run a democracy, but it's where we find ourselves.
Okay, so, we'll go back to some of this other stuff. We have another question that came in. It says, what would it take for Connecticut to get permanent vote by mail? No excuse absentee voting, which is great, they say, but permanent vote by mail, as Oregon has set the standard for all voters and California has as an ongoing option for all voters.
I'm assuming that if the ballot measure passes, so I think everyone knows the question about universal access to absentee ballots will be a question that voters get to answer on the ballot in November. And I don't know why I say that. No one knows that either, by the way. But
no, you're right.
Actually, fewer people know that. On the AARP call, they did a poll, and 78% of the people on the call had no idea about the ballot question, although I think it was about 53% knew about early voting, but I digress. Should the ballot question pass, then I'm assuming the legislature could pass a law about mail voting, and it would go through the normal lawmaking process.
And I don't have the wording of the question here on the ballot, but does it talk about absentee ballots? Does it talk about voting by mail? I mean, what's the question itself?
So, I love lawyers, but,
Said no one ever.
But, sometimes it's hard to discern, like the meaning. I believe the exact question reads, and I see some people who know, but let me try and remember. Shall the Constitution of the state be amended to allow every voter to vote by absentee ballot? Is that right? Yeah, right, yeah. So there is explanatory text that the legislature votes on and puts forward to accompany that, and that will be in every polling place. But this is why I try to get the word out, because people need time to research and understand what that means.
Because if you lived your life voting in Connecticut and hearing what an absentee ballot was, an absentee ballot in Connecticut means something you get when you actually physically can't come there on this Tuesday because there was no other way to vote in Connecticut. So even using the word absentee, it sort of messes with the idea of what the question is actually asking, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a little confusing unless, you've been sitting around the table talking about this for a long time. So I try to explain it one way, really. A yes vote means that you would be happy to have the General Assembly look at ways to expand access to absentee ballots in terms of not needing to so tightly fit into one of those excuses. And as I said, 33 states right now have some form of this universal access. A no vote means you want things to stay exactly as they are. But what I also try to point out, a lot of people think, well, I don't want things exactly. I I don't want to vote yes because the way our absentee ballots are organized, I don't like it.
Yes.
But you're almost guaranteed if you change the absentee ballot program, or once you allow for universal access, we would have to change the system.
Yes.
I've already talked about some of the ways I think our current system is not great. So in my opinion, passing the ballot measure would allow us to sort of open that up and change some things. Much like in 2020 when we had the emergency executive order during the pandemic for every voter to vote by absentee ballot regardless of reason. For example, we had to barcode the ballots. There's a lot better ways to track absentee ballots, to allow for signature curing, all of these types of things that we don't currently have because our volume doesn't mandate it. But if it were much more expansive, I think we could look into a whole different system.
Yeah, I think one of the really troubling things about what you just laid out is people look at the question and say, do I want it the way it is or a new way? But you just explained that most people don't know how it is right now. So what exactly does that mean? Okay, so we need more education, obviously. Do you have a worry that as we give people, I'm going to play the other side of the fence here, as we give people more options about how to vote, that we inundate people with too many options? They don't know, do I go to this place on the Saturday beforehand, or do I go to this place on the Tuesday? Can I mail it in? What do I do? And I think the more options people have, sometimes people might just say, I don't know what the hell to do.
It's not been a problem in other states. I used to joke when I was campaigning that the same society that will pay more for pre-cubed watermelon wants convenience in their life. Other states who have had both early voting, universal access to absentee voting for decades now, what they have found is that most people vote by absentee ballot, then early voting, then election day. And you can guess why.
Yeah.
It's an order of convenience, and like one random Tuesday in November is the least convenient. The states that have shifted to all mail voting primarily have done it because it's more cost effective. We have so many polling places in Connecticut, and the cost to run them, we're seeing now with early voting, it's quite high. So a lot of states found out, hey, it can be more secure, it's easier on the voter. I happen to think it's great for voters to be able to sit around and research what's on their ballot. Most voters in Connecticut don't know. They can find a sample ballot on our website, for example, and they often show up at the polls having no idea what's on the ballot. And then it's just like, oh, let me guess.
Yeah. I think one other question that's sort of pertinent tonight is not too terribly long from now, there is going to be a presidential debate. Anybody here? There's a presidential debate tonight. And one of the two candidates might spend some time talking about his particular worries about voting in America and whether or not the vote is, legal, if the vote is fair, if someone is going to steal the vote from him, once again. What do you tell people who say, with all this new stuff in Connecticut, how do I know that my vote is going to be cast? How do I know that somebody else isn't like taking my ballot out of a box and throwing it in the garbage? How do I know that someone isn't stuffing a ballot into a box and saying that's a vote for one candidate or the other? I'm just asking.
No. It's a fair question.
A lot of,
and it's one.
And you probably hear this around the state.
I answer some permutation of this all the time.
I'm sure.
On the one hand, it's funny, the AARP interview I did the other day, the moderator used to be a registrar, and we were talking about this question a little bit. I think you have to understand that there are so many laws and regulations and procedures in place. Any registrar would tell you, I mean, the registrar's handbook, no one wants to read it because what is mandated around every election, they take it seriously. Every detail has been considered. There are tons of emergency plans. It's a very tight system. What the other thing I would say is that, you know, I think about elections all the time, right? And if I had to think about what I'm concerned about Russia, Iran, and China, because we know they are trying to influence elections. That's not conjecture, it's just fact. I believe the FBI and Homeland Security just put out their latest report a few weeks ago. I worry about AI and the proliferation of fake news sites that is also being perpetrated by those same nations. I worry about things like doxing. I worry about superstorms coming up. There are real things to worry about. Election fraud, so-called election fraud. The latest thing that everyone's been asking me about is, what are you doing to stop illegal immigrants from voting? Forget the fact that most immigrants are afraid to even do things that they can do because they're afraid of being detained or deported. So if you even put that aside, there's so much to say, John.
We've got a whole hour.
You know, so I was trying to track, because I started getting questions, so I was trying to track, like, where did this even come from? We've had all these laws in place for quite some time. And apparently, Cleta Mitchell, who's affiliated with Trump, put out some stories saying that Joe Biden was loose on border control because he wanted people to come into the country to vote for him. And then Elon Musk put out, I don't know what you call it, put out an X. I used to say tweet, like, I don't know. I don't know what the verb is.
I haven't kept up.
He put out a post that said, Democrats are importing voters. So if I loop back to misinformation and disinformation, that post was seen 23 million times. And surprise, surprise, all of a sudden, I start getting calls and emails about it. We are fortunate to live in a country with First Amendment rights, with freedom of speech. But we have to remember, just because it's said doesn't mean it's true. And there, like every other aspect of election law, there are so many safeguards in place. And when I think about fraud in my office, the other major body of work that we're in charge of is the business registry. Business fraud is actually a global problem that many entities are tackling to solve, and it impacts a lot of hardworking business owners. Election fraud has not risen to that level. It's every study on every parameter has shown either 0.0000001% or 0.00001%. I mean, it's not the problem that we should be talking about. We do have real threats facing our election, and I just wish people would divert to solving those, and funding in elections is one of them.
So what got you interested in doing this in the first place? You love talking about elections, but why did you say, this is the thing that I want to make this highlight part of my career?
Yeah, I promise you it was never on my radar or agenda. I never thought I'd be in any political or government job. I have always liked to help people, my entire career prior to politics was in nonprofit work. And I somehow ended up running for state representative. I won, and I was in that role, which was the first time I had actually looked at government in such an intimate way. And when Secretary Merrill said she wouldn't run for re-election, my first thought was, wow, that sounds like the only job in government I think I would love. Because being able to start, I'm a former business owner, and being able to start my own business, and it's really difficult to start your own business, and to grow it and to make it a success becomes a labor of love. And I really thought, wow, the secretary's office oversees the business registry. I would love to be able to help other people who are running their businesses. And it has the civic side. And when I was in the legislature, I was vice chair of the elections committee, the government administration and elections committee. And I saw how often people would come to either testify in a public hearing, or people would just pull me aside to talk about an issue. And I saw how low our civic literacy was. And I thought, wow, if I run for this position and if I achieve it, I would love to be able to do more to shine a light on the need for civic education and civic engagement, because I think that is the cure for a lot that seems to ail us. Feeling divorced from government, feeling like our voice doesn't matter, the divisiveness in politics, all of these things I think come down to a lack of civic literacy. And I really wanted to begin this shift away from people thinking about all of this as politics and thinking about government instead. No matter how you feel about politics, people in government make decisions about our lives every day in just about every way. And by people backing off because they don't like politics, I feel like we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
If I can just push on that a little bit, I think, but one issue is that depending on your side of the political spectrum and how you view politics, you might well think that government isn't actually a thing that helps you, that government isn't a thing that's useful. There's a lot of people who every day wake up and think, if only government would get out of my life. They don't see what you're talking about as a positive. They see it as meddling, right? And that's a big chunk of the population right now.
Well, government is a big tent, right? Some of it is more meddlesome than others, right? But everything gets done through government, whether or not this library could be built because of zoning laws, or whether you could drive here on the road, how often those roads are repaired, how much investment is made. Literally everything about our lives is decided by someone elected somewhere, or a trickle down from a decision that person made. What is that quote? It's something like, just because you don't take an interest in government doesn't mean it won't take an interest in you. So you're better off being informed and understanding how it works, exactly what decisions are being made, by whom and when, and how you can intersect with them.
So we were talking before this event a little bit about how much you got to know Connecticut before you were in this job. And you said, look, I mean, I lived in this area in Fairfield County, and I commuted into Manhattan, and I commuted back. So talk about that a little bit. I mean, how has this job over the course of the last year or so helped you understand this state better?
Oh, it's been fantastic. Even when I started running for secretary, that was the first time I really had to drive around the state. I think I made it to 128, 29 towns. I put 12,000 miles on the car. And being the best thing about running for office is that you often find yourself in rooms or speaking with people that you would have had no natural way to meet otherwise. That might be true in your work as well. And it's kind of like traveling to another country. You always learn something speaking to people. So I really enjoy getting out. Like people often say to me, like, Secretary, like, I can't believe you came. There's only like 10 people here. And maybe I shouldn't, but I like going to everywhere I can when I'm invited, because no matter who I meet, I learn something that is helpful, especially in this mission to spread civic engagement and try to figure out why people aren't voting, what they do or don't know about our policies or regulations, and really just, at my core, I want to help people. So, when people say government doesn't work for me, I'm like, okay, well, how can we get it to?
Yeah. So I want to learn more about that in terms of what you hear from people when you go out, specifically around the civic education or around voting. But before I get to that, let me just go on a personal level. What have you learned about Connecticut? What are some things that have surprised you just driving around? I'm not talking about the job, but just like you, Stephanie, getting in the car, going to towns you've never been to, like, what have you been like, wow, this is really cool, or wow, this is really weird?
The biggest surprise?
Yeah.
I can't even say it. The biggest surprise was how little traffic there is
everywhere else
outside of this area. I was like, is this what it's like? I mean,
yeah.
You can just breeze down the road.
And up in Hartford, we're like, everyone's moving to Fairfield County. It's so cool in Fairfield County, and it's great up here. There's no traffic.
I mean, literally, that
Yeah.
was my biggest shock.
I can imagine.
But I've seen so many great things, I honestly can't even think of one in particular. But I will say one thing that I've really enjoyed. We started doing poll worker appreciation events.
Nice.
Around the state. So that is one of the reasons I get to travel around. And it has been so gratifying. It is the most feel-good thing I think I've ever done, because poll workers are like, no one's ever thanked us before. And, some of them, like some are like, I've done this for 63 years and this is my granddaughter and now she's starting. And it's just been, maybe what's surprising is if you watch the news, things often feel very dire. But when I travel around, I find lots of reasons to be uplifted, a lot of inspiration, a lot of joy, and a lot of people like just doing the best they can, and it's reaffirming.
Well, and it's interesting. So for years on the radio, I would talk with the secretaries of state about, why can't we get early voting? Why can't we do it like the rest of the country? I will say that there is something about election day, and you show up and there's these people who've been doing it for 63 years, and for the 25 years I've lived in Winstead, most of those people have been there the entire time. There's sort of a civil atmosphere to the thing. There's the people outside 75 feet away, but they're outside, they're holding signs for either candidate on either side of the street, but they're getting along and they're sharing pizza. There's something actually really remarkable about that. And I can imagine that that's something that's inspiring to you when you go see it and talk to the poll workers and whatever. There's something about that that's like, wow, that's the best of us right there.
Absolutely. There's so much cooperation, and we never get to hear those stories. Like, I think it was last year in the Republican primary, I was in Brookfield maybe, and the Republican registrar was there and the Democratic registrar was there. And I was like, oh, what brought you here today? And she's like, I forget the names, I apologize, but she said something like, oh, the Republican registrar called me at 4:30 this morning because the person who was supposed to work had to cancel. And I said, oh, sure, I'll come in and work. And she was working the Republican primary and thought nothing of it because they cooperate all the time. And that is what it's like in most towns in Connecticut. And when I hear these stories, it makes you realize, like, people are people. Some people are great people who want to do the best, who are great friends and neighbors. There's always going to be an outlier. That's just people. It's not the job.
Yeah. Of course, you remind me, I mean, in this rosy picture, you remind me of something that I used to ask secretaries of state about all the time, which is, why exactly do we have a Republican and a Democratic registrar in all these towns? That seems like, it seems
very unique.
very unique, yeah, I'll say.
Most states don't.
Most states don't. Why do you still have that? We talk about saving money. Couldn't we save money doing that?
You know, I actually don't know the history of it. Some people in this audience might, but I do not. I've only been there a year and a half.
No, you can't
I have to look that up.
But it does seem crazy. So, okay, there's a few other questions that people have. This is almost a series of statements and asks for you. We would like to know if changing the voter registration form to ask for an email address has been considered. It would make it easier for registrars to fix any unclear handwriting on the form.
Oh, yes. I've considered all of these things.
I've considered everything.
As you might imagine, almost everything comes down to money. We will be changing the voter registration form, but there are thousands of them still in a basement somewhere. So when we next have to place an order, there's also a law coming down the pike about allowing for non-binary options, etc. So the next time we update it, we will be making some of these changes. I don't recall offhand if legally we'd be able to require an email. I mean, we can't, I know
Sure.
for a fact that we can't require it, but we can ask for it. This also came up with our online portal for absentee ballot applications, and we were able to quickly make some changes online. And we simply explain, you're welcome to leave email and phone number blank, but, I mean, we do it in shorter words, but if you provide it, that will be helpful, because that is the only way a town clerk would be able to contact you if there was some problem with your application, like maybe you forgot to fill in something or you filled it out incorrectly. We have a lot of college students right now who are checking email because they don't read the rest of the sentence that says that is only applicable for a very small class of voters with disabilities. So the town clerks would like to call and say, you checked this off wrong, can we mail it, and verify that they can mail it, but there's no phone number or email. So I try to make common sense reforms wherever I can, and it's usually only a budgetary item that might stop it.
Okay, and you mentioned this, but I think we have another question here about allowing to check a box that would be a third option, male, female, a non-binary option. This seems like a very important change. Like, when could this happen?
I believe, as I recall, when I was in the legislature, I thought a law passed, but the effective date isn't until 2026, I believe. And we, regardless, it's a change we plan to make the next time we order the forms. I wish I could say we had discretionary budget so that we could throw out everything existing and order a new supply, but we don't.
Okay, so we have another question. It's not really, again, a question. This is someone who wants you to discuss the importance of voter guides, and this is very self-serving, and they write, the role journalists have in promoting fair and honest elections. I suppose you can talk about that. I mean, what value do you think voter guides have? How do we get more information about what's happening, not just with how the election happens, where you show up, but so that I know something about the candidates too?
Voter guides are extremely important in my opinion. I've never lived anywhere except Connecticut where I didn't get something in the mail telling me what's on my ballot, how to vote, where my polling places, etc. So when I moved here, my first election, I was waiting for my mailer, but nothing ever came. And as a result, I got to the polls and was unprepared for the ballot question at the time, a constitutional amendment about early voting and no excuse absentee voting. I did not feel prepared to vote on it because I had no idea what they were talking about, and it was oddly phrased. I left it blank. Now, looking back, I wish I had filled it in. But so I've always felt voter guides are important, and the secretary has had the authority to create one within available appropriations, but no funding was ever appropriated. But I just, again, as I mentioned earlier, every time I've been out campaigning, that is the #1 question. Where can I go to get all the information? So our intern-driven voter guide will have, it won't be mailed to everyone, but it will be on our website, and we'll push it out to all those partners. But when the law was written, it does require that we include every candidate on the ballot, a link to their website if they have one, and their email and phone if they have one. So all of that information will be available in one place for the first time ever. I'm very excited.
Thanks to interns. Yes.
Yes.
Thanks to the power of interns.
Yes.
But before we run out of time, people like me, and I think people generally who talk to you about this part of your job, about the elections part of it, but the small business part of it, the business outreach part of it is a big part of what the secretary does. Can you just explain to people who don't understand what exactly you do in terms of the small business folks of Connecticut, helping people to make sure that they're able to actually have a small business in Connecticut?
Yeah, our office is really interesting. No one actually understands what we do. It's important to know that we do not write laws, pass laws, create laws, so we are living within the laws set by others, much like everyone else. We are behind the business.ct.gov portal, so most people become familiar with that if they're starting a business or a nonprofit, or if they're thinking about starting one. Our role is mainly ministerial, like think digital filing cabinet. We are housing all of that information, making sure that any entity that has to submit an annual report has done so, ensuring that any business that is outside of the state is actually registered in Connecticut to do business in Connecticut. We often liaise with the Department of Consumer Protection on some issues. So it's a lot of paperwork and making sure people are in compliance, closing their businesses properly, etc. What we've tried to do, and some of it is limited by changes that have to be made by the legislature. We definitely always, every year, compare all of our fees to other states. We look at certain trends to make sure we are in keeping with what's happening nationally. I also felt it was important because when I was a business owner, until I got to government, I served on the Commerce Committee in the legislature, and I thought, wow, I don't think businesses know these resources exist. Because, when I was working 80 hours a week, I didn't have time to Google, government funds. So when I started, we put together a monthly email where interns, again, comb the web. We look at DECD, foundations, chambers of commerce, federal entities, anyone that's offering free training, grant opportunities that we can find, and we amass it, and then we email it out to our business list once a month.
It's interesting because what I was going to ask you is, what did you bring from your business experience when you came to this job that helped you understand what you wanted to do? But it almost sounds as though you were like, I had no idea that there was all this stuff that was available already.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, I like to help people. So sometimes things in life just feel too hard. So I try to break down what I consider to be artificial barriers. If I can put together a business newsletter with a couple of interns that would help business owners, that help Connecticut, either raise funding, etc., like, I'm gonna do it. Would it be great to have a staff person? Yes, but I haven't needed it. And in fact, I heard a great story. I was at an event last weekend, and a gentleman that I had met a couple of months ago had mentioned that he wished he could scale his business, and I told him about the Connecticut Boost Fund, which he hadn't heard about, and he said, "Oh, I saw it in your newsletter because I'm on the list." So when I saw him last weekend, he was like, "Oh, I applied, I got the fund, it's a 4% interest loan." He's like, "And now we're expanding to 3 more locations." And I'm like, "Oh, that's great. My work here is done."
We just have a minute left, and another thing I learned about you is that you really, and again, this wouldn't surprise me, you want to inform people and you want to get people civically engaged. You really love libraries. Why do you love libraries so much?
2 reasons. I grew up very poor, like no electricity poor, so I often had to go to the library after school to do my homework, and I would stay there till closing because it's better than doing it by candlelight. I learned the hard way. And then secondly, fast forward many years in my career as a fundraiser, I was working with the Queen's Library. And I stumbled upon the American Library Association conference. And that was like, wow, this is the best conference I've ever heard about, because very interesting people write books. So I started going to the conference every year, and people would be like, "What library do you work in?" And I'm like, "I don't, I'm just here." But it was a great way to hear from many great speakers, keep up to date in what books are being published. And I found it to be very enriching, and librarians are just great people. It's a community resource that I think is undervalued, and I don't think any of us would want to see a community without a library.
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of that. I used to bring my public radio show to a librarians conference. Mm-hmm. And if you bring a public radio show to a librarians conference, it's like a Taylor Swift show. Like, everyone's like, "Yay, public radio!" They go crazy for it. So yes, I also love librarians. I want to make sure we gave them a little love. Thanks again to the folks at the Ferguson Library for hosting us. And a big thanks to Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. Thank you so much for your time and for all of your expertise. I really appreciate it. I want to also thank the folks who came out here tonight. There's a lot of other things going on in the world tonight, so hopefully you can make it home to see that debate. Oh God, that debate. Thanks to our sponsors, the Mohegan Tribe, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, Eversource, Clifton Larson Allen, the Causeway Agency, Express Strategies, Hinckley Allen, and Rowthorne Law. A nice round of applause, please, for the people who helped to make this possible. Thanks also to the folks from the Connecticut Mirror, Bruce Putterman, Elizabeth Hamilton, Chris Nelson, Claire Dignan, Irene Mackey, and Gabby DeBenedictis, and Brianna Nelson, who helped to put this all together. We got a next event. We hope that you can come see us with Senator Richard Blumenthal on Thursday, October 17th. It's at the Fairfield Public Library as we continue the series In the Room. Information will be posted soon in the coming weeks on our events page at ctmirror.org. And of course, please do support the Connecticut Mirror, because ctmirror.org is a place where you can find some of this nonpartisan information about what's going on, not just in elections, but what's going on in our state. So please do support nonprofit journalism today. I'm John Dankosky. Thanks so much for being with us.